The Force trembled across time and space, ripples echoing from a disturbance that should not have existed. On a forgotten world deep in the unknown regions, an ancient Sith stasis chamber flickered to life. The black robes were intact, the mask untouched by time. Darth Revanant's Jedi, then Sith, then Savior, opened his eyes once more. But this was not the galaxy he remembered. Revan had been pulled forward by a hidden Sith ritual encoded in an ancient holocron, executed by a cult of zealots known as the Eclipsed Flame. Their goal: bring back the ultimate warrior to lead the Sith anew and crush both Jedi and Imperial remnants. Waking in the era just after Return of the Jedi, Revan was stunned to find the Empire shattered, the Jedi nearly extinct, and the galaxy in chaos. But more than that, he felt the Force itself fractured. Time had not welcomed his return. The Force began reacting violently. Visions came unbidden, Luke Skywalker falling to the dark side, Anakin never becoming Vader, the Sith Empire of old rising again from nothing. Every step Revan took sent ripples of paradox through the Force. His presence in this timeline, this wrong time, was unraveling destiny. Luke, alerted by the Force, sought the truth of the tremors he felt. Guided by the ghost of Yoda, he found Revan on the desolate world of Malachor V, the site of one of Revan's greatest atrocities. There, the two clashed not as enemies, but as echoes of different legacies. Luke, the last Jedi of his age. Revan, the progenitor of a schism that nearly destroyed the Order. They realized Revan's return had activated a convergence point and nexus in the Force, where time, possibility, and reality collided. Palpatine's return, Snoke's rise, even Rey's powers, none of it was stable anymore. The timeline was bleeding. The Force began tearing holes into the past. Jedi from the Old Republic appeared in flashes. Clone troopers vanished from memory. Darth Bane's rule of two began unraveling as old Sith spirits fought to reclaim their legacies. To prevent collapse, Revan, Luke, and a reluctant Kylo Ren who had begun hearing voices of Sith lords long dead entered the world between worlds, the mysterious plane hidden within the Jedi Temple on Lothal. There, they confronted the full magnitude of the damage. Revan had to choose: remain in a future he did not belong to, or return to the moment of his fall and allow history to run its course. In a moment of clarity, Revan passed his knowledge to Lucia complete history of the Jedi, the Sith, the Mandalorians, and the Force itself, and stepped back into his rightful time. As the portal closed, time reknitted itself. The Skywalker saga resumed its path, but subtly changed. Luke now built a stronger Jedi Order, one with a fuller understanding of balance. Rey's future became clearer. And somewhere, in the shadows of the past, Revan smiled, knowing the future had been saved not by war, but by choice. In the darkest corner of the unknown regions, where star maps failed and hyperspace twisted into chaos, a dead planet waited silent, cracked and forgotten. Buried beneath its jagged surface, hidden by layers of Sith alchemy and time-warping technology, an ancient stasis chamber hummed softly. Its occupant had not stirred in centuries, until now. A flicker of red light blinked in the void. Then another. Mechanical arms jerked to life, spinning runes across an obsidian console. The temperature shifted. Energy pulsed. Inside the chamber, a figure lay motionless stall, armored, draped in tattered robes. A mask of myth, iron, and mystery hid the face. This was no ordinary Sith. This was Darth Revan. His fingers twitched first. Then came breath slow, controlled, but labored. The Force stirred around him, like a storm held in chains. He was waking, but Revan had not returned on his own. In a ruinous temple high above the chamber, 5 hooded figures knelt in a circle. Flames danced between them. Their voice chanting in an ancient Sith dialect echoed into the mountain like distant thunder. The Eclipsed Flame, a cult forgotten by the galaxy, had done the unthinkable. Using fragments of Revan's holocron and the blood of Jedi relics, they had torn a hole in time itself. "He will rise," one whispered, trembling. "The galaxy will kneel," another hissed. But as the ritual neared its peak, the mountain shook violently. Bolts of energy cracked through the stone, and for a brief second, stars blinked out above them. Revan's eyes opened, burning, yellow, sharp with confusion and rage. The stasis pod hissed open, releasing cold air and centuries of silence. Revan stepped forward, slower than a warrior, faster than a ghost. "What have you done?" His voice was rough, more breath than sound, but it carried like thunder. The cultists fell to their knees, weeping with awe and fear. "You brought me here, but not to my war, not to my time." He looked to the stars, unfamiliar, wrong, and the Force trembled. It had begun. The moment Darth Revan stepped out of the stasis chamber, the Force twisted. Not like a gust of wind or a ripple in still water. This was deeper, older. The galaxy itself exhaled as if it had just realized something impossible had returned. Every sensitive being from Jedi to Sith, from Force ghosts to unborn children felt it. Something was wrong. On Coruscant, a young Jedi in training dropped his lightsaber mid-lesson, clutching his chest as if his heart had skipped 3 beats at once. On Dagobah, the swamp groaned and festered as the lingering echoes of Yoda stirred, whispering in languages not spoken in centuries. In deep space, the world between worlds flickered like a faulty star. Revan didn't understand it at first. He stood alone on the shattered surface of the forgotten planet. Stars above him rearranged in patterns he didn't recognize. Time felt loose, like he was both anchored and adrift. He closed his eyes and reached into the Force. What came back was chaos. A flood of futures and pasts collided in his mind. He saw Luke Skywalker as both savior and tyrant. He saw Anakin never becoming Vader and also never being born. He saw entire planets that never existed, and wars that ended before they began. Every possible path that could have been was now bleeding into what should have been. He staggered. "This is wrong," he whispered. In his time, the Force flowed like a river. It had direction, balance, even when it leaned toward war. Now it felt like a storm tearing itself apart. Back in the ruins, the cultists were celebrating. Firelight danced in their eyes. But Revan turned to them slowly, his voice low and cold. "What have you done to time?" One cultist stepped forward, bold with belief. "We've given you what the galaxy denied, another chance." Revan's glare burned through his mask. "You've broken something far greater than you understand." He turned back to the sky, feeling the threads of destiny pulling apart like frayed rope. The Force wasn't just out of balance. It was unraveling, and he was the knife that had cut it open. It began slowly, at first barely noticeable ripples across the surface of reality. A Jedi archivist on Ossus, flipping through a digital codex, watched in confusion as text flickered and changed before her eyes. The dates of the Clone Wars shifted. Count Dooku's death vanished from the record. Whole entries began rewriting themselves without explanation. In the Sith ruins of Moraband, where only dust and shadow remained, a hidden chamber trembled. Statues long sealed in darkness cracked open, and red mist leaked out like breath from the past. The voices of Sith lords long dead and locked away began whispering again. "Where am I?" one voice hissed. "Who dares disturb the cycle?" echoed another. Darth Bane's essence stirred from its slumber, sensing a threat not from Jedi, but from history itself unraveling. In the Jedi Temple on Lothal, ancient holocrons started activating on their own. Visions poured from them like storms. Jedi Masters of the High Republic flickered into being, confused and disoriented, some even speaking of events they had never experienced or shouldn't have. Ezra Bridger, watching in stunned silence from deep within the world between worlds, whispered to himself, "This isn't how the story goes." The fabric of the Force was tearing. Darth Revan walked through it all, feeling the consequences of his presence like knives in his skull. Every step he took, every moment he existed in this future, sent tremors backward and forward in time. His identity one man who had been both Jedi and Sith made, the Force uncertain of what to do with him. He was a paradox made flesh. Atop a crumbling watchtower on Jedha, a lone monk meditated, only to scream suddenly as he was pulled into a vision of Darth Revan and Anakin Skywalker standing side by side then against each other, then merging into one being of light and darkness. The lines between Jedi and Sith began to blur. The rule of two bent under pressure as Force ghosts from ancient wars began slipping into the minds of the living. And in the silence between stars, the Force itself seemed to ask a question it had never asked before. What happens when history stops knowing who the heroes are? Luke Skywalker stood alone at the edge of the cliff on Ahch-To, the sea crashing violently below. The wind tore at his cloak, but his mind was far from the physical world. He had felt it again stronger this time. A fracture in the Force. It wasn't just a disturbance. It was a scream. Something ancient had woken. Something that didn't belong. He closed his eyes and reached out. 1,000 voices cried at once. Jedi from long before his time. Sith whispering in languages older than the Republic. Visions came in flashes wars he'd never fought, planets he'd never seen. A masked figure standing in fire and shadow. A name echoed, half remembered. Revan. Luke's breath caught in his chest. He'd read the name once, a forgotten entry buried in the remains of a Jedi holocron. A Jedi who had become Sith, then something more. A being of war and redemption, of choice. But Revan was legend. A myth told by the last of the archivists before the Jedi Temple fell. How could he? He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The Force knew. A few days later, Luke landed his X-Wing on the desolate world of Malachor V. The planet looked like a wound-deep scars etched into its surface, as if history itself had tried to forget what happened there. He walked through shattered temples and broken towers, his boots crunching against glass made from centuries of destruction. Lightning split the sky. Then he saw him. Standing alone amid the ruins, cloaked in shadows and silence, was Revan. The mask, the stance, the presence. Luke felt it like a weight pressing on his chest. Revan turned. Their eyes met blue to burning yellow. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Luke's voice cut through the storm. "You shouldn't be here." Revan's answer was calm, but heavy. "I agree." Luke stepped closer, cautious but curious. "Your presence is tearing the Force apart." "I didn't ask to return," Revan replied. "But now that I'm here, we have a problem." Lightning flashed again, but neither flinched. In the ruins of the past, two legends faced one another not as enemies, but as echoes of destiny, drawn together by a galaxy on the brink of collapse. The ruins of Malachor V whispered with memories, most of them violent, all of them broken. Luke Skywalker stood beside Darth Revan in silence, his hand near the hilt of his lightsaber, but not drawn. The Force pulsed unnaturally here, like a storm rolling beneath their feet, waiting to burst. Revan moved slowly, running his hand along a fractured wall, its surface scorched with blast marks and ancient Sith carvings. His voice came low, distant. "This place, it was never meant to heal." Luke studied him carefully. "This is where you broke the Mandalorians." Revan nodded. "And the Jedi, and myself." The sky above them rumbled, as if reacting to the truth. A strange energy shimmered across the surface of the ground-faint blue light, like threads tugging at the fabric of reality. Luke crouched, touching the stone. He felt everything. The past. The future. Timelines unraveling and tangling like knotted rope. "This isn't just a battlefield," Luke murmured. "It's a convergence point." Revan turned sharply. "You see it too. A place where time bends." Luke continued, rising to his feet. "Where the Force doesn't flow, it collides." Revan stepped closer, his voice calm, but filled with urgency. "This world was touched by something unnatural. So much death, so much power. The Force left a scar, and my presence is reopening it." Luke frowned. "I've seen something like this once, a place outside of time, the world between worlds." Revan's eyes narrowed. "Then it's worse than I thought." Around them, the ruins began to flicker just briefly. Towers appeared whole for a heartbeat, then collapsed again. A voice childlike, ancient, and impossible echoed through the temple halls. Asterisk. Choose. Asterisk. Luke drew a sharp breath. "Did you hear that?" Revan nodded grimly. "It's not speaking to us. It's speaking through us." The convergence point was alive, its will shaped by imbalance, by pain, by the paradox of Revan's return. Every step forward they took sent echoes backward, altering events, reshaping legacies. If left unchecked, the entire galaxy's timeline could fracture beyond repair. And so, in the ruins of a war-torn world, Jedi and Sith stood together, not as enemies, but as guardians of time itself. In a hidden chamber deep within the crumbling heart of Malachor V, the air shimmered with raw Force energy. Luke Skywalker stood before a cracked obsidian pedestal, its surface carved with ancient runes glowing faintly with red and blue light. Darth Revan was beside him, his presence casting long shadows across the walls. The energy in the room buzzed, like a living thing, pulsing with the strain of too many futures pressing against the present. Luke stared at the pedestal, his voice steady but cautious. "This is it, isn't it? The origin point of the fracture?" Revan nodded slowly. "A wound left open for centuries. It was dormant until I returned." Luke's hand hovered over the runes. "I've never felt the Force like this. It's not light or dark. It's confused." Revan let out a breath. "Because so am I." Luke turned to face him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "I don't know what I am anymore," Revan continued, the words heavy with the weight of centuries. "Jedi, Sith, hero, monster. I've worn every face and lost all of them." Luke's expression softened. "But that's why you're here. You represent the conflict the Force is trying to understand, and it can't move forward until you do." There was silence for a long moment, broken only by the hum of the Force pulsing around them. Revan reached out, placing his hand on the pedestal. The room trembled. Visions exploded across the chamber, walls ghostly images of Revan's past and possible futures. Him as a Sith Lord conquering Coruscant. Him as a Jedi sacrificing himself to save Mandalore. Him standing alongside Anakin Skywalker. Or killing him. Luke stepped back, watching the possibilities swirl and fade. Revan clenched his jaw. "I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted peace." "Then choose it," Luke said quietly. "The Force is listening." Revan's hand tightened on the pedestal, and the red and blue light flared, then blended, slowly turning into a violet glow. The timeline began to stabilize, just barely. For the first time in centuries, Revan began to reconcile with who he was. And the Force, in turn, began to breathe. Across the galaxy, the tremors in the Force began to reach their peak. On Exegol, deep beneath the shadowy spires and perpetual storm clouds, the ancient Sith spirits stirred restlessly in their tombs. Lightning forked across the black sky as a familiar figure emerged from the darkness. Emperor Palpatine, his frail form sustained by forbidden technology and unnatural power. He paused mid-chant, sensing it. A disturbance more potent than the return of any Jedi. More dangerous than a rebellion. "Revan!" he rasped, the name like venom on his tongue. The Sith Eternal priests surrounding him looked up in confusion. Palpatine's eyes narrowed. He was not supposed to return. In the center of the chamber, a holomap glitched violently. Time signatures began to overlap. Names faded in, and out Leia Organa, Rey Skywalker, Ben Solo, all blinking like dying stars. Alternate realities flickered into view for mere seconds. Darth Vader redeemed. Darth Vader triumphant. Luke never becoming a Jedi at all. Palpatine snarled. "The boy thinks he can fix time, but he is the break." Meanwhile, on Mustafar, Darth Vader's fortress groaned beneath sudden pressure. Deep inside the meditation chamber, the air grew cold. Vader's helmet, long preserved as a relic of fear and legacy, cracked slightly down the side, just a hairline fracture, but enough to bleed energy into the room. Kylo Ren, meditating nearby, gasped and fell backward, overwhelmed by visions. He saw Revan not as myth, but as living memory. A warrior who had once united both Jedi and Sith, and in doing so, made the Force hesitate. "Who is he?" Kylo whispered, struggling to steady his breath. Across the stars, Sith cultists awoke in confusion, their teachings unraveling. Temples realigned. Artifacts lost their glow. Prophecies once thought sacred dissolved into fragments. The Sith legacy was collapsing under the weight of a paradox. Revan's return was not simply a threat to Jedi or Sith. It was a challenge to the very idea of destiny. In one moment, he stood at the heart of the Force. And in that same moment, the darkness that had built empires for millennia felt uncertain, afraid even, because Revan was not bound by their rules. He was the rewrite. In the stillness between stars, Revan stood on the threshold of the world between worlds. The portal shimmered like liquid glass, suspended in nothingness. Countless doorways arced around him, each one humming with the energy of a moment in time of memory, a decision, a future that might have been. He felt them all tugging at him like whispers in the dark. Luke Skywalker stood a few steps behind, watching Revan with quiet intensity. "You can feel them, can't you?" he said softly. Revan didn't turn. "I lived them. Some of these, I remember. Others, I almost did." He stepped closer to a glowing archway. Inside, he saw himself on the Star Forge, blade raised, sparing Malak's life. The scene flickered, and the image changed this time. He didn't spare him. Each version of Revan felt real. Each one had consequences. "I thought coming here might help me decide who I truly am," Revan said. "But all it's done is show me how many selves I've left behind." Luke approached slowly. "That's what makes you dangerous and powerful. You remember your mistakes." Revan glanced back. "And that frightens you?" "No," Luke said. "That gives me hope." Revan stared into another portal. This one showed a galaxy where he never turned to the dark side. Peace had lasted longer. The Republic never fell. The Jedi Council remained whole. He watched it for a long moment, his voice barely a whisper. "If I step through one of these, I could fix everything." Luke moved beside him, eyes fixed on the same vision. "Or break something worse." Revan nodded slowly. "Then maybe the answer isn't choosing a path, but letting the past go." The portals pulsed as if they heard him. The world between worlds began to dim, doorways slowly fading one by one. "You're stabilizing it," Luke said, eyes wide. "No," Revan replied. "We are." Together, they stepped away from the edges of time, leaving the doors behind. The Force, for the first time in centuries, began to weave itself back together. Because in choosing not to rewrite history, Revan had finally written his truth by walking forward, not backward. The sun was just beginning to rise over Ahch-To, casting soft light across the ocean and cliffs. Luke Skywalker sat cross-legged on a stone outcrop overlooking the waves, his eyes closed, his breathing slow. He was meditating, but not alone. Across from him, Darth Revan knelt in silence. The mask was gone. His face, weathered by centuries of war and redemption, was at peace. The wind moved gently between them. Not a sound in the world disturbed their quiet momento conflict. No lightsabers, no ghosts from the past. Just two men who had lived too long in the shadows of destiny. "I never thought I'd find peace," Revan said softly, his voice tinged with awe, as if the words themselves felt foreign. Luke opened his eyes, calm and kind. You didn't find it. You earned it. Revan chuckled. You sound like a Jedi. Luke smiled. Old habits. They sat in silence a moment longer, the force around them calm-balanced in a way neither of them had truly felt before. The galaxy was still recovering. The timelines were still fragile, but the worst had passed. And it was because Revan had chosen not to rewrite his story, but to accept it. You're not what I expected, Luke said suddenly. Revan raised a brow. And what did you expect? A Sith, a warrior, a threat, Luke replied. But you're more than that. You always were. Revan looked out toward the horizon. I was all those things, and none of them. Maybe that's why the Force reacted the way it did. Maybe, Luke said, the Force needed someone who had truly seen both sides and survived. Revan didn't respond at first. Then he nodded. I never wanted to be a symbol. I only wanted to choose freely. And you did, Luke said. That choice might have saved us all. The sun climbed higher, its warmth touching their faces. No Jedi. No Sith. Just Revan and Luke, two souls who had been caught in the currents of prophecy, now finding stillness in their own choices. The galaxy had been bent, shaken, almost broken. But now, it was healing. The stars above Tython shimmered in perfect stillness, as if the galaxy itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Luke Skywalker stood at the ancient Jedi Temple's summit, his eyes turned upward, his mind reaching outward through the Force. A sense of clarity flowed through him, not just peace, but understanding. The kind that came only after facing something far larger than yourself. Behind him, Darth Revan stepped quietly across the stone floor. He was no longer cloaked in war. No mask, no armor. Just a man who had faced his past and chosen not to be defined by it. It's strange, Revan said softly. After everything, the silence is what unsettles me most. Luke smiled gently without turning. That silence is balance. Revan stopped beside him, gazing out across the valley below. Do you think it will last? Luke glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. Not forever. Nothing ever does. But that's not the point. Then what is? That we keep trying, Luke said. Every choice, every moment. The Force isn't about control. It's about harmony. Revan nodded slowly, the words settling over him like sunlight. I once believed I could shape the galaxy with power. But power without purpose, it only creates more darkness. You learned what many never do, Luke replied. That redemption isn't a moment. It's a path. A breeze moved through the temple, gentle and cool, as if even the Force was listening. Revan looked down at his hands, once instruments of war, now still. So what happens now? You live, Luke said simply. Not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, just as Revan. For the first time in centuries, Revan smiled not out of triumph, not out of pride, but out of something quieter, something earned, gratitude. The galaxy would remember his return as a moment that could have shattered everything. But instead, it became a turning point, not because Revan conquered, not because he vanished into legend, but because he chose not to break the timeline. He chose to let go, and in doing so, gave the future back to those still waiting to shape it.